Tropical Storm Danny, now up to 60-mile-per-hour winds.
Yeah.
Doesn't look all that healthy, though, on the satellite.
Yeah, Mike and I were looking this morning at the quick scat, which shows the surface winds.
Right.
And Mike got a little hot.
Well, just one small quadrant, southeast quadrant, where they had one 50-knot wind, and now we've got a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm. So I'm not necessarily sure that's indicative of the entire storm, because
Right.
it doesn't look all that impressive on satellite, certainly.
No, it doesn't. So let's talk about what the models are doing with this system here, because what we do are we look at several models, and we want to show you first the GFS model. That's just the name of the model. You can call it whatever you want, but it's called the GFS. Now, here is Danny right now. You see this here? That is Danny right now. And I want you to see what happens with this system as it goes up the coast. The forecast is for Danny to become a hurricane. We can stop it just right about here off the North Carolina coast. Where you see the blue and the pink, that indicates rain. But I also want you to notice as this goes up into New England here, well, here's the thing. It kind of gets co-located with a trough that's coming from the west. So once it gets into New England, it might not be considered a hurricane. It might be more of a hybrid system, because it's not just tropical. You also have perhaps some cold air. So here's that low and here's the other low, and they're kind of co-located. And so you can't really have that and call this purely a hurricane. So it'll be interesting to see what it's called. Regardless of what it's called, it's going to be very windy and very wet throughout portions of New England. Now, here are all the models. That was just one of them that we showed you. Here's how many there are. I mean, it looks like spaghetti, right? We call this the spaghetti model. It looks like it will stay offshore and then again eventually maybe perhaps make a landfall in New England. It's still too early to tell. This looks very similar, however, to a little guy named Bill. Remember Bill? Well, let's have a look at where Bill was and where it headed to. So here is Danny, and Bill was in the same vicinity, but at this time it was actually a hurricane, and it tracked a little bit farther off than Danny is doing right now. So we actually might get a little bit of rain here along the coast as this makes its way up the east coast here. With more on this system, I'm going to hand it over to Mike and Jeff.
All right, let's bring in Jeff Morrow right now. If you remember last week, Jeff, on Cape Cod as Hurricane Bill skirted by. Here to take a look at what the impacts potentially could be on Cape Cod. Give us kind of the lay of the land there on the Cape.
All right, well, as you know, you've been there. It's not necessarily totally flat. There are some hills there out on the Cape. Let's talk a little bit about what Bill did last week, and I think Stephanie touched on this. Basically, what Bill was doing was moving more offshore, and these were some scenes like I saw, and mostly it was a high surf event, Mike. This was near Orleans, and it wasn't much of a rain event. Definitely was not a wind event, just some high surf that went through that area. Now we can show you what's going on up there currently, and what has happened is a cold front has actually pushed through this area and has cooled us off just a little bit. We're going to look at the Coast Guard cam. Actually, a very pretty morning, and you can see how the surf is much lower. It's like a mill pond.
Water ski on that.
You basically could. All right, but this week things are different. Last week it was very warm, very muggy, and Bill went by offshore. This week, though, much cooler.